Okay, brilliant. Welcome, everybody. First and foremost, my name is Carmen. I am part of our outreach team here at Owlypia, and I'm also currently a teacher here in Kazakhstan. So, if we could take a moment, I would love to get to know all of you. Let us start with perhaps you can just tell me your name and what subject you teach, and perhaps the age of the students you teach. Let me start first. I see Ainura.
Hello, good evening. I'm happy to see you. My name is Ainora. This year I just started, so I'm new on teaching. So, yeah, it was first time in my experience. My student passed the global, so we are waiting for the Abu Dhabi. So, yeah, that's all.
Very exciting. I'm so glad you could join us.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to see you as well.
Thank you. Next, I see we have Munara. Okay, let me continue. Aislu. Perhaps you can tell me what grade you teach, which classes you teach. Okay, I see Nazira. And maybe, please don't hide away. Let us introduce ourselves.
Good evening, everybody. I'm also a teacher, English teacher, and grades from 5th to 10th. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. I'm so glad you could join us.
Thank you.
Okay, I see someone here just has their name as Altanai, perhaps, and no, someone with just an A. What is your name?
Okay, hi. Good evening, dear colleagues. My name is Altanai. I have been teaching English for 11 years, and my students are from 6 years till 18 years old. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Carmen. Thank you.
Nice to meet you as well. 6 to 18, that sounds quite intimidating. Well, brilliant. Hopefully I will get to hear from some more of you as we proceed through our presentation today. So, today's topic is Beyond the Textbook, real strategies for engaging, motivating, and teaching English effectively. For today's workshop, when they approached me, I wanted to focus on the things that I wish people told me about English teaching and some new approaches we can take. I think often we as teachers find that the method we're using does not work for every single student. And so this was an opportunity just to talk about some other ideas that we could maybe include or adapt to our classrooms. But I know that I have several experienced teachers here in the chat, so I'm looking forward to hearing your additions and your contributions from your experience as well. So let us begin. First, before we start with our teaching and our teaching methodology, I would like to hear from you. Who was your favorite teacher growing up and why? Would anyone like to share with us?
Okay, allow me to share my experience. When I was a schoolgirl, the favorite teacher was the lady from Japan. She was teaching us the Japanese. So I think all my classmates used to love her just because she was like very simple, easy of explaining something, and I think she was like more playful, I guess.
Wow. Okay. So can you remember some of your Japanese?
Yeah, bit, but it was quite a long time. But like konnichiwa, watashi no namae wa Inura desu ka?
Wow. She must have been a very good teacher if you still remember it.
Yeah, exactly. Thank
Wonderful.
you.
Thank you so much for sharing, Ainura. Would anybody else like to tell me about their experience, who their favorite teacher was growing up? Perhaps Zamira, would you like to share with us? Well, I would love to share with you a bit of my experience. When I was growing up, I had an amazing English teacher. Now, I had the advantage of experiencing English being taught as a second language and as a first language growing up in South Africa. And this basically meant that I understood from a young age that the English I was speaking at home and the English I was speaking at school were very different. And the moment I met my teacher, her name is Miss Petrakopoulos, and she was an amazingly bubbly and energetic, excitable person. And she is truly my inspiration for teaching today. And I think part of the reason I did become an English teacher myself, because she was the person who made me understand that knowing a language anyway, whether it's the school English, the home English, the English you learn on Duolingo, the English you learn from the 3 sentences you remember, all English is part of the language we use to communicate. There is no better or worse. And I think she was often very forgiving with all of our students for our slang terms and strange language we brought to our classroom. And that is where I would like to start our discussion today. So let us take a look. Today we will be talking about our 5 central topics, starting with student motivation, moving to some modern teaching approaches, technology and resources, which I think has become such an interesting topic in the past few years, different teaching methodologies, some ideas that we could perhaps integrate, and finally teaching in practice, which is where I'm hoping we can work together to see which problems we are facing and how we can better solve them. So let us have a look. Firstly, when it comes to student motivation, tell me, what do you think are some of the benefits, perhaps we can share in the chat even, what are some of the benefits? Oh, I see all the messages. Good evening, everyone. Please share with me, what are some of the benefits of learning any new language? Anyone think of any positive points? Why should we learn a language? Let me see. You're also welcome to share via voice chat if you are able to connect via mic. Perhaps Mehdi, perhaps you can share with us, what are some of the benefits? Good for brain work. Oh, absolutely. Yes. It was interesting. My first teaching job here in Kazakhstan, I was working with quite a few elderly students, and they highlighted the studies that were being done for language to prevent and sort of help process your brain so that you are less likely to get Alzheimer's. And I started looking at some of these studies, so you're absolutely right, good for brain work. And let's see, Aislu, do you have any ideas for us on what are these benefits? Well, let's perhaps take a pause here and go to my second question. What is the benefit of learning English specifically? See, we are all brought here together by a mutual love and passion and excitement about the language. So why do you think your students should learn English? It's the most popular language, very true, in some extents. To study abroad, that is the reason I hear most often these days. Very exciting, yes, to study abroad. To travel, yes.
I think learning English opens doors to global communication. It's like better career opportunities and the access to knowledge worldwide.
Absolutely. So we see that English has this global effect where, interestingly, even when I came to Kazakhstan expecting no one to speak English, I very quickly learned that quite a lot of people in Kazakhstan can help me and speak English to me. So even in countries where you might not expect it, you have this amazing benefit of being able to talk to people. Now, when it comes to our classroom, students have various reasons why they might be interested in learning a new language. When you are dealing with teenagers especially, I've noticed that some of the reasons you might get will be to study abroad, an interest in Western media, or I even have a student who said she needs to understand celebrity gossip better. So teenagers might be motivated for different reasons. Of course, when we deal with our young students, it's mostly their parents or their academic institution that is motivated about their English learning. But I think that this is something that kids very quickly realize allows them to engage with people on a broader scale. Now, of course, when we are trying to motivate our students, it is important to meet them where they are. Now, I am uncertain whether I would say English is the best language or the favorite language, but one thing I can certainly say is that English is one of the languages with the most resources available online. Everything from YouTube videos, dedicated websites, Pinterest posts. There is a consistent influx and growth in teaching materials for the English language. And this gives us such an advantage as English teachers, as we are now in an era where we can access them so fast. But not all materials will work for all students. And this is where students can very quickly become demotivated when they are facing a subject that is too difficult, and the reverse, when they are facing something that is too easy. The other day, I was showing my teenage students a song that was intended for children because I wanted them to hear it and look for specific words. And even though the song wasn't very simple, I noticed that it wasn't something they were really connecting with. And instead, I thought, okay, let me see if I can find a good alternative online for them. So I found a Taylor Swift song for them, and suddenly they were doing their work. So there are many factors we need to consider when choosing materials, not only difficulty level, age, and if possible, the personal interests of your students, as this can be a highly motivating factor. Now, many students already engage with Western media, some of them privately through TikTok, some of them through most commonly Disney movies or other film that has been translated, any of these like Marvel, Avengers, any of those. So the moment we take materials from those things, they're not as foreign or as strange as some of the other materials that we see. So students can often connect to this, and it allows them to build English in a very natural way. Just the other day, I was teaching my students a class on how to comfort someone when they are sad. What do we say to them? And I chose a particular scene from The Lion King, and I showed him this, and he said to me that he's watched this movie when in Russian when he was smaller, but he's never actually went and watched it in English again. And it was so interesting to him to see it now that he knew English and understood English better, how different it was sometimes. Now, the last piece of advice that I can say here is to show students examples of non-native speakers. The main reason for that is because we want students to have realistic expectations, but we also want students to be motivated by people who are on the same journey as them. Many of my students get upset when they cannot learn a British or American accent, when they sound like themselves. And I think the problem with that comes in that often the material that we are choosing is very native speaker heavy, And it creates this expectation that when you learn English, you sound a certain way. And we, of course, all know that when we speak a language, our accent comes through. That's who we are. And it's important for students to still take pride in that. I've had now about easily over 20 students who are over the age of 40 come to me and say, oh, they want to speak more English, but their accent is so bad. And that is not what we want. Even when it comes to correction, unless I can't understand at all, I don't feel like having a bit of accent when we speak is ever a bad thing, because we all have it. I remember the first time I was asked to speak French to someone, and they said, oh, I can hear your English immediately. So I understood in that moment, accent, that's us. And that's not a bad thing at all. And it's important that we model that for our students so that they don't get demotivated. And I have also noticed that when I show my students examples of foreign celebrities, especially these K-pop artists speaking English, a lot of my students really connect with that because they understand, okay, this is a person that is also learning English as a second language. So don't shy away from those examples. I understand we always want to give our students the most pure materials, but showing them something they can connect with is sometimes more important. Now, when it comes to older students, one of the things that I like integrating into my classroom is a student motivation plan. And I will show you a simplified version of the one I use in class. So the first thing I do is I have students fill out the question, why do you want to study English? I want to learn English so I can. And immediately this gives me a great picture of what I should be focusing on in my classroom. When I see I have a lot of students who want to study abroad in my class, I know, okay, I need to be focused a bit more on academic English they might be using for IELTS or SATs exams. When I see I have students who want to understand Western media, I like to include some slang terms in my class. I had a group of students where I had about 3 of them answer they want to learn English so they can tell people about their country. I thought that was so beautiful. I thought, great, let's do a class that focuses specifically on communicating things like culture, religion, ethnicity, some of those key terms that I've noticed we sometimes sort of skip over in the classroom. And immediately this opened up that door for them. Now, the next thing that I love to investigate with my students is what motivates them. This is a specific list of, are they hoping to achieve something? Do they want a certificate in an Olympiad, a medal? Are they looking for some trophy? What is it that they're chasing? Then communication is, do they feel motivated when they see they can say more, when they realize they're communicating in English more? Which I find to be a little bit more common with adults as well. Do they want to have fun? Are they more excited about lessons when they're playing games? Are they motivated when they are doing something connected to their interests? And finally, are they motivated when they interact with their friends? Once you understand these things, the kind of activities you choose for your classroom can change quite a lot. Students who are motivated by their friends, if we can bring in an element of group work, teamwork, collaboration, some competitive debates, this is something that can really highlight working together with their friends, and often it can be a very confidence building for our students. For their interests, I have some of the schools that I've worked for like choosing a specific theme, ordinarily for a month. However, we do also see if you have some ability to choose a theme, choosing one of your students' interests, teaching them how to communicate that interest can be so key. Then, if they want to have fun, there are so many amazing resources for games, for activities that are high energy for our more high energy friends. Communication, achievements, very similar kind of thing. Achievements with younger students, I've used sticker systems. I've used a sort of like an award system where if they got enough of these little tokens, they could trade it for like a stuffed animal or something in my class. And this again allows them to work towards a specific goal that they can see and measure. And then especially my older students, I like spending a bit of time on the what stops you category. This focuses very specifically on some of those things that might be stopping our students from getting excited about English. A lot of my students are so perfectionistic when they try and speak that if it's not perfect, they don't want to speak. And that worries me. I want them to talk to me. I always say to my students, if there's mistakes, we fix them. You make the mistakes with me so you don't have to make them outside of this classroom. Some students just are lacking in confidence, and this could be due to a shortage of ability, just being a personality that doesn't really like engaging with things that are a bit uncomfortable. And with this, we need to build those skills by giving them opportunity to show their strengths. I'll get back on that a bit later. Now, boredom. Some students just get bored learning. And if this is a problem students are continuously facing, we know something about the methodology, our approach, could use some touching up. A lack of routine. This was my first mistake as a teacher. I often like to create, to create very unique lessons. And I didn't really focus on the cohesiveness of this. And students would be a bit bewildered when they don't really know where to start, where to stop. They don't know, do they have homework? Are they going to have a test? And having a standard framework for these things allows students to build themselves into those routines. So it is very, very important to have a structure, even if you're going to be more flexible and fun with it. And lastly, and I think the one that requires the most time is the overuse of L1, otherwise known as our beginner English, spending too much time communicating in simple terms. Now, as a person learning a foreign language, I have also been in this position where I can't remember the more complex word, or I've spent so much time learning the easier word, that why do I want to now change it up? And this is something that we need to get our students out of that funk and start teaching them language that they feel is important to know. And then I just like to include a bit of a multimedia section for my students, just a section that allows them to choose how they learn best. Now, it is unfortunately not always possible to integrate this into every single activity, but I have noticed when giving students practice tasks, homework tasks, anything that I want them to do additionally, or if I have a free day in class, something like this can help me figure out where does our students' interests lie. And if I know I'm facing a particularly difficult topic that I don't want to really cover with them, then I come back to this list and see, okay, my students learn by listening. Let's get some songs, let's get some podcasts. Let's see how we can support them in a way that makes this more comfortable for them. So let us carry on to the second part of our journey. Now, when we come to modern teaching, I very strongly believe that we all are educators in the best time in history to be teaching English. It is so exciting to have access to all these materials, to be so connected. The fact that we can have a video call with all our educators here together. This is amazing opportunities that back many years ago when my grandmother was teaching, she would have loved to have. So we are in an amazing time. And we need to understand that modern teaching focuses on communication. It focuses on our students, and it focuses on love for the subject. Those three things are what brings us all together. I've seen so many students who can write in English, they can listen, they can read, they can't communicate. And that is, in my personal opinion, one of the only reasons to really learn a language is to have the ability to communicate to people with it. Now, of course, when we think of a student-centered approach, this means that the one-size-fits-all method of the past is just not working anymore. We understand a lot more psychologically about what is happening to our students in the classroom. And this gives us an opportunity to help them grow the best they can. And that is why I like to take time to do surveys, questionnaires, little check-ins with my students to make sure that they are still where they need to be. For some students, their grades will be a great indicator if what we're doing is correct, but that will only be for some. So let us take a minute and see what is it we're really getting into with modern teaching. So the first thing we need to do is increase that communication. Our classrooms are English-only environments. And this was something that I remember it used to annoy me quite a lot in my school back in the day. Not because I didn't feel comfortable speaking English, but because the school I was going to was not English. And I was quite annoyed because I was learning this whole other language to be here, and now I can't even use it. So when it comes to our English-only environment, students need to understand that the space that you are creating is their English space. And this is when they need to be talking, they need to be thinking in English. And when you are dealing with students who are perhaps a bit less comfortable in English, that does not give us as teachers a good space to teach fully in English, because we want to make sure our students understand us. So it is important at this point to start mimicking the behavior you want to see as quickly as possible. When it comes to our classrooms, simple requests like, may I go to the bathroom, may I drink water, these things that we hear 100 times in a day, those things need to be in English. Because even from those simple examples, we can start looking at sentence construction, question construction, basic nouns. We've got so much language we can take from simple things like that, that when students have a few sentences memorized, that will just help them along the way. The more they learn, the more they can use. And this is the best opportunity to do that. Now, the other thing, I was very surprised when I faced some schools here, and I noticed how much translation schools were using in the classroom. This almost became the golden rule when I did my teaching, was to never use translation, not have translation readily available to the students. The chief complaint I get with my students, old, young, is that they feel like they're not thinking in English. They are only thinking in their native language and then translating it and saying it. And I've heard this complaint over and over and over. And I thought about the languages that I've learned, and I thought about how I have to think about it. And I've realized that this is interesting. Why did this happen? And when I walked into the classroom and I realized how much teachers are relying on translation, it made me understand where this problem is coming from. Because we are not teaching this thing that we are looking at. For example, a cup is a cup. We are teaching them that the thing that they are looking at is this native word, and if we change that word, it's that. For nouns, it works great. For grammar, it does not work at all. And that is why we discourage translation, so that students can build the correct structures the moment they switch over to their other language. Now, of course, with young learners, instead of translation, what do we use? And the best option here is going to be visual materials, photos, videos, especially highly interactive videos. A simple scene where you see people touching and talking about an object can be incredibly insightful for students to understand, firstly, what the object is, what are the verbs that we might use connected to that, and get a bit more of a feeling for the pronunciation of all the parts involved, all of which are significantly more useful to us as educators than translation. Now, for older students, my rule in my classroom, and this was not unfortunately a rule that I had because of me not wanting translation, my rules in my students was that if they wanted a word, they weren't allowed to translate it. They had to ask me. And in the beginning, this was very challenging for my students. They really despised it. And then later, it allowed them to explain better. They learned to describe better. They started thinking of how smaller words connect and how we can use this to get to a more complex concept. And this is something that now, when I look back at that group of students, that really evolved over time. And this is something that I would strongly recommend bringing into your classrooms if you have not already. So, let us continue. Now, the next part that I would like to talk about is correction. So again, let us see some messages in the chat. It's been a minute since I've heard from everyone. Tell me, when should we correct our students? Any ideas? The end of the task? I like that approach a lot. Any other ideas? After they finish talking? Yes. So, let us talk a bit about correction. Correction is incredibly useful. When students are formulating an idea, it can be very difficult for them to unlearn something that they've continuously fixed in their mind. So, when we think about a student, if we don't correct them at all, even if at the 10th or 20th time we start correcting them, that idea is already there. It's stuck. So we need to make sure that we are correcting early enough. But then we have the other side of the coin, which is that students often feel discouraged when they are corrected. I know I myself, if someone corrects me more than twice in a sentence, I don't want to continue talking. Yes, exactly. I see. This is exactly what I'm talking about. We shouldn't interrupt our students. And we want them to be fluent, we want them to be confident. And the moment we correct them, that gets lost. We don't want to disturb them, we want them to focus on what they're thinking about. Absolutely. But then, where should that be in our lesson? Because if correction is harmful, if correction is damaging, where do we put it? Now, I personally, on the way I design my lessons, and that's very much going to determine where your lesson planning stage is. But I only correct during the first and the very last section of my lessons. I have a lesson plan coming up, so I'll go over exactly where and what. When I introduce the language to my students, I have them do a little bit of production and I correct them. At that stage, I want them to understand how to use it correctly. And at that stage, all of my students are using it incorrectly. So it's the perfect opportunity to correct because no one feels embarrassed, everyone's making mistakes. So it's perfectly normal. Then, as Mehdi said over here, at the end of the task, once you've gone through a stage where your students have been doing some production, the goal is for them to produce independently and confidently. So having too much correction or having really any correction at all during these phases can be very harmful. So instead, I just take a pen, keep some small notes on the mistakes that I've heard perhaps a few times, or some mistakes that are a bit more critical to the specific lesson we are doing. And then I like to come back to that at the end of the lesson and say, okay, I've heard these mistakes, let's talk about them. And because you're not naming specific students, this tends to have a very small effect, if any. Now, the amazing thing of our lessons is that, well, our students, is that they tend to bounce back quite fast. So you want to make sure that you don't want to take too many mistakes from one specific student and take them quite generally, and our students tend to do fine with that. The only last thing that I will recommend is that we want to focus on correcting language at the right time in terms of their level. Now, when we are dealing with mixed levels in our classrooms, we need to meet students where they are. If a student is a beginner student, they're walking there, it's their second, third day learning English. They're not going to sound like our other students, and we can't correct them at that same level. At that stage, any production is a good thing. So what I like to do is I like to measure my students' levels or assess them depending on what your approach is with this, and see what do I expect them to know already. And then I start monitoring, what am I teaching them in classes? What are they learning in their other classes or clubs? And I focus on correcting that language. Anything that is above their ability or is something that we have not discussed yet in class, I'm not correcting that. Because we also want to focus on our lesson and our objectives and not get too excessive at trying to fix every little thing. Because in the beginning, your whole day will just be correction. So let me talk us through this for a little bit. Now, let's talk a little bit about our English in real life. Now, the key problem that many classrooms face is that students can speak English, they can speak academic English, they can produce essays, reading, listening, and the moment they have to order a meal at a restaurant or go on a touristic vacation, suddenly they're realizing that that English is getting a bit stuck. And that's when we very quickly lose confidence in our abilities. The good news is I also see the opposite. I have some students that learned English through interacting in English cultures. And this can be a fantastically motivating thing as well. So, we need to start bringing these examples into our classroom as soon and as early as possible. There are incredible resources online showing people in all kinds of scenarios, simply sitting at a restaurant, someone making a check-in booking at a hotel, working on any traveling arrangements, making a reservation. These are very simple things that we can do to make sure that our students are prepared to deal with that. But this is the other thing. I remember when I was studying French, they taught me how to make a hotel reservation. And I very confidently, it was my first day up in Zambia, and I thought, okay, I speak French, they speak French, I'm going to make my hotel reservation by myself in French. And I confidently lift up the phone and I phone them and they go, hello. And I'm like, okay, I was expecting bonjour, but all right, how are you? And they say, yes. I thought, okay, you were supposed to say, how are you? I am good. And then I said, I would like to reserve a room for the weekend. And the man said, what? And I went, oh, okay, I would like to reserve. And it pretty much carried on like this before I very quickly realized that even though I had studied chapter 13 of Lingua Franca, he did not. So, unfortunately, our students get prepared for artificial scenarios. They get prepared for something that isn't perhaps real. So when I do a simulation, a scenario in my classroom, I started throwing them any challenge they may face so that they have to think on their feet of what language they can use. Simply, I did an exercise where my students were customers and I was a rude waitress. And my students didn't know how to react. And I said to them, what would you say to someone if they are being rude to you? And my students said, well, that's not very nice. I'm like, what if you had a restaurant? Okay, skip it. What do we say next? I did the same simulation for a hotel losing a booking. And I've done a simulation for someone who lost their passport in the airport. Consistently, I try and think of what are the most common problems we might face. And that takes the scenario from being this fun little activity in class to something that they understand how to change our language depending on what is happening around us. And that is the core skill we really need them to have, especially when we are focusing on improving our students' overall ability. Excuse me. So when you are bringing in real life situations, absolutely do. It is such an asset for our student. But make sure you are varying the activity enough that it's not just a repetition, a little rhyme in their minds of something they think is correct to say. Okay, so let us proceed. Now, one of the ways that I like to encourage students to get more interested in English is to start doing activities that are less focused on English and focused on just what's happening around them, something they would do normally, but in English. For example, this was one of the core reasons why I originally got involved with Owlypia. I liked that my students were going to an Olympiad that was about soft skills. My students had done English Olympiads. They succeeded at English Olympiads, but they've never done anything where they were just speaking English without having to think about English. And this was so beautiful when they got involved with Owlypia, that they were able to take the skill that they had and use it for something else. And I feel like for a lot of my students, it may have taken the pressure off of having to focus on something purely academic and purely using this English skill that they've learned. Now, for Owlypia in particular, this is especially strong because Owlypia gives the same material that they give in America, in the UK. They give that same material in Kazakhstan, in Kyrgyzstan. So our students all are reading the same stuff. Well, obviously depending on their ages, but in other cases, this means that students are engaging with an authentic example of what they would have been had they been in England or had they been in America. And this is something that I wish I could find 100 ways to replicate for my students. As much as I might try and do scenarios and situations in my class, this is something that I wish I could do more of. Now, so if your students have not joined an Owlypia round, I strongly recommend it. They will have so much fun. Now, let us talk a little bit about technology and resources. Starting at the beginning, there are so many resources now when it comes to the technology we can use in our classrooms. The main way I like to introduce resources in my classroom is with games, with activities. And this is something that students begin to recognize, they understand the format with, and it gets them quite excited. So I have a few examples of ones that I turn to quite often, which is Kahoot, Quizzes, Bamboozle, Gimkit, Wordwall, Quizlet, Padlet, and Flip. And this will all depend on what your main aim is of your lesson. And quite a lot of these already have pre-built quizzes who were built by other English teachers. I had an unfortunate thing happen last year where in the middle of one of my classes, they decided that they were going to change the whole schedule for the day. And although I believe it's always important to be prepared, the group that was sitting in front of me, I had nothing prepared for. And I opened Bamboozle, I opened Kahoot, and I said to them, look, we're going to play some games, and kept my students busy. They were interacting in English, working on their vocabulary, and they just thought they're hanging out and having fun for the day. So this is a perfect way. And if also, you have 5 minutes left at the end of your lesson, if that miracle should ever come to you, this can also be a cute way to sort of finish up our lesson with something that leaves the students feeling good. Now we get to the slightly more controversial side, which is artificial intelligence. Let me just quickly get a feeling in the chat. Do you use artificial intelligence at all for yourself, for your classroom, for any reason? Very exciting. Let's hear from some of our other teachers. Do you use artificial intelligence? Yes. Oh, good. I quite like him. Now, I think when it comes to artificial intelligence, it's become a bit of a dirty word in our educational communities. And I do respect that we understand that it should not be replacing teachers, and it could never. Interestingly, the other day, I thought I would have an activity with my ChatGPT, and I asked it, "Can AI replace teachers?" And ChatGPT said, "No, AI is not intuitive enough to adjust to students." And I thought, that's interesting. Everyone's saying you're stealing my job and you don't even want it. So that is where we need to be smart about how we use AI. AI cannot replace teachers. We are the brain power behind everything that we are doing in our classroom. What it can do is support us. I like to think of AI as the personal assistant my school would never pay for. And this is the amazing thing. ChatGPT is an expert AI. It's a language learning AI, which means when we as language teachers use it, it is specifically designed for that function. Now, my favorite thing to do at the moment with ChatGPT is to adjust materials. Occasionally, I have the luck of finding an incredible article. It's the perfect thing for what I need in my classroom. It's the topic, it's the vocabulary I've taught my students, but it's pre-intermediate and my students are sort of beginner. And in that case, I go to ChatGPT and I said, hey, I need this article. I need it easier. And I've done this time and time again. Even with my IELTS classes, when I see that my students are preparing for IELTS, which, if you don't know, is at an upper intermediate level, I've adjusted it, full IELTS essays, all the way down to pre-intermediate, so that my students can start practicing the format. Now, this is not the only AI that we have. CuraPod is fantastic for creating interactive lessons. If you are struggling to find a way to make your lessons more involved for the students, this could be a cute AI to play around with. Then we have Magic School. I like Magic School because it does most of the work for you. So if you are in a situation where you can't plan a lesson, or you just need to get a lot of work done in a short period of time, Magic School is an excellent support. So a good idea to take a look at this AI as well. I've got some more for you. The other ones that I could strongly suggest, I have Twee. Twee is beautiful because it focuses on building more language-focused lesson plans, which means when you have to introduce a complex grammar point or some more complex vocabulary, Twee can help you with that area. And then the other one, I see that we have here is TEFL AI, which is fantastic, especially for our purposes where we are teaching English as a second language. Fantastic AI to know how to adjust and build plans around your students. So if you've only checked out one or two of these, please don't be afraid to use AI. It is our support, it is our assistance, and it is a good help to all our educators in finding quality materials for our students. In the beginning, when AI was released, I was a bit of an anti-AI person. And then after using it for about 2 days, I realized it has its advantages. Because I'm sitting for 3 hours planning a lesson that my other teacher just finished in 20 minutes. So it is a good tool. Let's make sure it doesn't replace our minds and our knowledge and our abilities, and instead help us along this journey. Now, I've spoken a little bit about the different methodologies I like using in my classrooms. And the two that I really want to highlight, which is two methodologies that have existed for years, but I always like to see them come back a bit, is the communicative approach and the task-based approach. I've recently been doing a lot of studying on these two approaches specifically, and how we can better utilize them for our students going forward, as I believe these two approaches are going to become a lot more popular in the years to come. The first one focuses on the communicative approach. Now, for anyone who does not know, the main goal here is to get your students talking as much as possible. You go away from a traditional teaching role, and instead you're floating around the classroom, helping students find words they need, helping students if they ask you for a pronunciation. You are giving students activities that makes them work quite independently from you, so that you don't have to be monitoring every individual student. Now, this will include things like role plays, discussions, and then gap activities. Now, the task-based approach is where the learning goes out of your heads and into your students. This is where students don't only deal with a worksheet, but work together to construct their own lesson. So we give them an assignment and they run with it. This could be anything from a constructive problem that they have to solve. My favorite task-based lesson where we were talking about environmental issues, and I told my students, okay, invent a product. And the language that came with this was remarkable. Again, I find that my students produce effortlessly the moment they are facing a task that doesn't require them to produce. So, I have added some examples for you here of what a lesson plan might look like for each of these. And you're welcome to request a copy of these slides after the lesson. That will become available to you. And you can see, perhaps you can find something you can integrate into your lesson. Now, the last thing I just want to mention is just going to be some key points on our pacing. With pacing, I've recently started focusing a lot more on the different psychological aspects of students' learning. I've noticed my students' attention drops fast. And I've realized, well, actually, students can't really concentrate for very long. 5 minutes for 5 to 10-year-olds, 7 minutes for 11 to 13-year-olds, 10 minutes for 14 to 18-year-olds. That is the core time you have that they are absolutely going to listen. It is possible for them to listen longer than that, but they would have to be interested in the topic. So I keep whatever I need to say down in that time before I'm having them do something, because I know they're not really listening to me after that. Same thing with vocabulary. In ESL training, we are always taught the golden rule that with your students, you want to focus on getting your activities to be a little bit over double the length of your explanation, so that they can cool down and process. So 5 to 10 minutes again. For 8 to 10-year-olds, you can go a little bit higher, 10 to 15. 11 to 13-year-olds, 15 to 20. And 14 to 18 will be 20 to 30 minutes. Which means this shows already why the task-based approach is such a fabulous option for our students, because it highlights the fact that our students are able to do more by themselves than just listening to us. Now, I've also just added, because I always get asked this question, how much vocabulary can you teach a child? Their age +2, and +4 if it's words they already know. Good. This is just a quick illustration of how I like to introduce grammar to my kids in class. I love using color. I love using photos. Whenever I need to give them an example, I like to do a little bit of mock beforehand, where I show them what I expect or what the activity includes. And then I move over to a section where I bring in something that is familiar, like a picture or a color. And then at the end, I highlight my grammar points, because I want to focus more on students producing something than producing it according to my expectation. So this was just a recent simple example that I did with my students. And overall, this is just a nice way if you are having difficulty with your students remembering the key terms. I remember I had a student type into Google Translate, what's the English word for noun? And like, well, noun. And this would be a good example for you of just how you can do that without focusing on those terms, especially for younger kids who may not really know them in any language yet. So let us carry on. I have some further advice regarding assessments. With assessments, make sure you are taking as much pressure off the kids as possible. There is so much work that they need to get through that is remarkably stressful for them, already just having to do anything in English. Now, with writing activities, I like to give time for students to share their ideas amongst each other. This allows especially weaker students who may be very intimidated by this activity to get some vocabulary ideas from their friends before they have to begin writing. This can also be a reminder for students of some of the work that you've already covered. For reading and listening assignments, I don't wait for formal assessments to do like little reading and listening activities. I do 5 minutes of that almost every lesson. Quick little reading or listening comprehension. And I've noticed that my students stopped even viewing this as a test when we actually face them. And lastly, for speaking, giving students enough time to warm up is the only advice that I will ever truly give someone. Because cold students speaking and warmed up students speaking, completely different things. Now, overall, I'm recently looking at a method of assessment where I'm giving my students assessment in the same way I teach my classes. And I've had quite a lot of success about this. So this is probably something I'll be doing a workshop for you on very soon so that I can tell you a bit more about that. Now, that brings me to the end. I realize we have so little time to go over everything we could possibly want to talk about when it comes to English. But I would love to know if there are any questions from you guys, any specific challenges you are facing that you would like to discuss. You are welcome to type for me in the chat, or otherwise you're welcome to unmute yourself. You're most welcome. Also, you are welcome to request the presentation because I know a lot of stuff I went through quite fast. So if there's something, especially for all those technological resources, please feel free to request it. You're welcome to have a copy. Well, I think I will conclude our presentation there. You're so welcome. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us on a Sunday evening. I hope your students know how dedicated their teachers are for giving up their Sunday evening for a lecture. Thank you very much to all of you. I'm wishing you a wonderful evening and good luck with all your classes tomorrow. Take care.